The city's roots, Lutetia and the limestone. Long before Paris became the city of light, it was a place of darkness beneath the soil. Its foundations trace back to Lutetia, a small Gallo-Roman town along the Seine River. Beneath the thriving surface of early medieval and Renaissance Paris, unseen and untouched by daylight, a vast network of limestone quarries stretched like veins through the subsoil, dug to build the very city that would one day rest precariously above them. From the 13th century onward, Paris grew rapidly. Its grand cathedrals, churches, civic buildings, and noble residences were all erected using the pale limestone carved from the Montagne Sainte-Geneviève and the surrounding hills. Entire neighborhoods, like the Latin Quarter and Saint-Marcel, rest on these hollowed-out spaces. Each block extracted from the ground added to the weight pressing downward centuries later. No one then imagined that the same earth which birthed Paris would, one day, swallow its dead. The forgotten quarries and the hollow earth. The miners, nameless in historical record, descended day and night into the dark, carving out the bedrock with pickaxes and rudimentary lanterns. There were no safety codes, no proper maps. By the 17th century, thousands of meters of galleries snaked beneath the southern half of the city, many collapsing silently as the ground shifted and cracked. Some parts of Paris were honeycombed with unstable caverns, yet development above never slowed. It was a city on a trapdoor, and no one realized it until centuries later. A crucial date in this hidden story comes on December 17, 1774, when an entire street, Rue d'Offer, ironically, Hell Street, collapsed into the earth. Dozens of buildings plunged into the dark. Parisians, horrified, gathered around the gaping chasm as smoke rose from the ruins, like the earth itself had opened in judgment. The collapse revealed how fragile the surface truly was. The city's underworld, unseen, unmapped, had begun to awaken. Paris above, the city of the living. While the underworld remained unknown to most, life above the ground in 17th and 18th century Paris was densely populated, disease-ridden, and haunted by death. Paris, by the mid-1700s, was one of Europe's largest cities, with over 600,000 residents. But its infrastructure lagged behind. There were few toilets. Human waste poured into the Seine. Corpses were buried in shallow graves or stacked in communal pits. In Les Halles, the city's central market, meat rotted alongside vegetables. Flies covered everything. The air, thick with the scent of decay, turned even priests' stomachs during funerals. Epidemics were frequent: typhoid, dysentery, cholera, all fed by the overcrowding and poor sanitation. But nowhere was the problem more visceral than in the Cimetière des Innocents, just beside the Church of the Holy Innocents, near Rue Saint-Denis. The cemetery had been in use since 9th century, and by the 18th century, it was bursting with bodies. The Cemetery of the Innocents, overflowing with death. It began as a sacred space, blessed ground, consecrated for Christian burial. But over the centuries, the Innocent Cemetery became a mass grave, a place where the bodies of the poor, the diseased, the forgotten were dumped in layers. Estimates suggest that over 2 million Parisians were buried in the space over 800 years. And yet, the cemetery was only about 1 hectare in size, the equivalent of a single city block. Bodies were buried one atop another, often dug up and reburied again. When mass graves filled, they were exhumed to make space, and bones were tossed into charnel houses. In summer, the heat baked the ground. Fluids seeped into nearby buildings. Residents in adjoining homes, known as the death houses, complained of the stench, the sickness, and the sight of bones poking through walls. One particularly infamous incident occurred in 1780, when the wall separating the cemetery from an adjacent cellar gave way, spilling rotting corpses into a wine merchant's basement. That year, under pressure from residents, merchants, and clergy alike, the French government ordered the closure of the cemetery. But with the Innocents closed, where would the dead go? The Bureau de Finances. Enter Charles Axel Guillemot. The responsibility fell to the Inspection Générale des Carrières, the office newly formed after the Rue d'Offer collapse, to stabilize and monitor the old quarry tunnels. Its first inspector, a meticulous and solemn man named Charles Axel Guillemot, was tasked with cataloging the forgotten underworld of Paris. Born in 1730 in Stockholm to a French father and Swedish mother, Guillemot was a trained architect with a fascination for structural integrity and geometry. He had a methodical nature and an eye for symmetry, skills that would prove vital in the years to come. He spent his early life in Paris, a child of the Enlightenment. He believed in rationalism, order, and the application of science to civil problems. When appointed in 1777, he began mapping every tunnel, every shaft, every chamber beneath Paris, venturing underground with surveyors by torchlight. As Guillemot worked to reinforce the ground beneath the city, a radical idea emerged. What if the dead of Paris were entombed underground, not in overstuffed cemeteries, but in the very bones of the earth that once built the city? A new necropolis. The plan to transfer human remains from the overflowing cemeteries to the former limestone quarries was daring, morbid, and logistically staggering. In 1786, the transformation began. At night, always at night, carts creaked through the city streets, veiled in black cloth and accompanied by chanting priests. The remains were brought to the old quarries near Place d'Enfrotrochereau, in the 14th arrondissement, and lowered by torchlight into the catacombs below. Bones were arranged in long galleries, stacked with eerie precision. Skulls and femurs formed decorative patterns. Crosses and plaques were installed. The ossuary was consecrated as l'Ossuaire Municipal de Paris, the official municipal bone depository. Guillemot insisted on order and dignity, even in death. Every bone had a place. Every tunnel was mapped. He worked under the belief that even the anonymous dead deserved a structure in death, a cathedral of bones beneath the surface of life. The descent beneath the living. By the spring of 1787, the initial waves of exhumation had begun to carve a new path for Parisian death culture. The once sacred cemetery grounds were being unearthed, not for construction or discovery, but for evacuation. Night after night, the city quietly removed its past, transporting centuries of mortality beneath its feet. The location chosen to house the dead was a former quarry entrance at Rue de la Thomassoire, leading deep under Montparnasse. At surface level, it was inconspicuous, a door behind an iron gate, attended by a silent civil servant with a lantern and a ledger. Beyond lay kilometers of tunnels, hewn by miners, long abandoned and reeking of earth and time. Here, the first remains from Cimetière des Innocents were deposited. Bones were not tossed or discarded, but carefully stacked in walls, meters high, sometimes 20 skulls deep. The arrangement was not accidental. Femurs were aligned. Skulls were set in rows. Every corner had symmetry. Every pile had a reason. It was Charles Axel Guillemot's vision that even in anonymity, there must be order. The procession of bones. Each night, the carts rolled out just after sunset. Covered in black cloth, drawn by silent horses, they creaked slowly across cobblestone streets. The processions were accompanied by monks from the Frères de la Charite, reciting Latin prayers over the remains. Passers-by were hushed. Windows closed. Candles flickered as the dead moved quietly toward their new tomb. Each cart could carry dozens of skeletons, most reduced to fragments. Long bones, cracked ribs, orphan skulls. Names were rarely known. These were the remains of plague victims, paupers, clerics, prostitutes, infants, nobles, commingled by the pressures of urban death and the failure of space. Upon arrival at the ossuary entrance, the bones were passed by hand-down narrow shafts into waiting chambers lit only by torches. Workers, often former quarrymen, labored in near silence, stacking bones by torchlight in the humid dark. Their pay was meager. Their tools were rudimentary. Their hands grew calloused from lifting death itself. The first inhabitants of the catacombs. The first human remains to be placed were not assigned randomly. Guillemot ordered that a central section, Gallery A1, just past the entrance hall, would serve as a symbolic foundation. Into this gallery went the oldest bones of saints innocents, some dating back nearly 800 years. Over time, remains from Saint Nicholas de Champs, Saint Eustache, Madeleine, and other central cemeteries would follow. Not all the dead were moved equally. Graves of the aristocracy were sometimes left intact, though even high-born families began to lose space. The ossuary became a leveler, uniting the noble and the nameless, the infant and the elder, in the geometry of bone. A plaque placed above the entrance read, Arrête. C'est ici l'Empire de la Mort. Stop. Here lies the Empire of Death. It was not a warning. It was a declaration. The cartographers of the underworld. While the workers stacked bones, Guillemot and his team of engineers began mapping the tunnels, many of which were unstable, branching, and partially flooded. They measured chambers, catalogued locations, marked subsidence. Stone columns were installed to hold ceilings. Diagrams were drawn in wax and ink, forming the first comprehensive plan of the Parisian underground. Engineers like Barthélemy Dufour and Alexis Brongniart joined the mission in the 1790s, refining the architecture of the ossuary. They experimented with ventilation shafts, lime treatments to prevent odor, and water drainage systems. The catacombs, though populated by the dead, were becoming a work of civil engineering, an inverse monument. Voices from within. Accounts from those who worked inside the ossuary paint a picture of grueling labor and eerie isolation. One record, preserved in a parish ledger, describes a man named Etienne Lagrange, a 27-year-old carrier, who after months of nightly descent, began experiencing dreams of collapsing tunnels and skeletal hands. In a letter to his brother, he wrote, "The skulls watch us. I swear some are not where I left them. One moved. Or perhaps I did." Priests conducted blessings regularly. They read aloud from the Book of Psalms. Certain tunnels were said to cause disorientation or panic. Workers tied ropes to the main shaft to find their way back, marking paths in chalk or scratching arrows into the walls. Candles burned unevenly. Sometimes, they snuffed out entirely, leaving men in total darkness. Political upheaval above. While bones settled in silence below, Paris above seethed with revolution. By 1789, just 3 years into the ossuary's creation, the French Revolution exploded. The Bastille was stormed. The monarchy was overturned. Heads rolled on the guillotine daily at Place de la Révolution. Cemeteries again began to fill. Now the catacombs welcomed fresh victims, some of whose names are still known: Georges Danton, Maximilien Robespierre, Charlotte Corday. Though many were buried quickly, unceremoniously, others would eventually find their remains relocated beneath the streets they helped shape through blood and fire. Ritual and arrangement. By the turn of the century, the ossuary was no longer just a repository, it was a sacred architecture. Galleries were labeled. Arches of skulls formed doorways. Tablets bore inscriptions of mortality. Where is death? Always behind you. Guillemot's replacement, Louis-Étienne Héricart de Thury, expanded the vision. He commissioned memento mori engravings, urn displays, and poetic quotations. The ossuary became philosophical, not just physical. Each wall of bones was a sentence in the sermon of death. Visitors, mostly elites and academics, were quietly invited into the catacombs by torchlight tours. Among them was Napoleon Bonaparte, who toured the galleries in 1804 and is said to have remained silent for the duration. He left without speaking, but ordered funding to continue. Quiet visitors and midnight scholars. By the first decade of the 19th century, whispers of the catacombs had begun to circulate among the Parisian elite. Though not yet open to the general public, the ossuary became an object of macabre fascination. Philosophers, physicians, poets, and aristocrats with morbid curiosity arranged clandestine tours, by candlelight and invitation only. These midnight excursions, led by quarrymen or low-ranking civil servants, descended through narrow spiral staircases into complete silence. There, among walls of femurs and skulls, guests encountered inscriptions in Latin, quotations from Horace, Virgil, Ecclesiastes. Each gallery served as a meditation on mortality. One guest, Antoine Lavoisier, father of modern chemistry, reportedly compared the decomposition of the human body to the transformation of elements, life converted into carbon, into gas, into dust. The catacombs, he mused, were a natural laboratory of organic matter. These intimate visits would later influence a wave of 19th-century literature obsessed with death, decay, and time, prefiguring Romanticism's darker obsessions. The ossuary opens. In 1809, under the authority of Louis-Étienne Héricart de Thury, the catacombs were officially opened for limited public access. Visits were restricted to certain days, usually the first and third Thursdays of the month, and only by prearranged appointments. Tours were not advertised. They were spoken of discreetly, often passed by word of mouth among artists, foreign dignitaries, and members of the Parisian salons. The experience was carefully orchestrated. Visitors entered through a carved stone arch, descended into darkness guided by flickering lanterns, and emerged in a long corridor labeled Gallery of Port Mahon. There they were greeted by an eerie stone replica of the Fortress of Mahon, sculpted by a former quarryman François de Cure, who had chiseled the model from memory while laboring alone underground for over a decade. Beyond it, the empire of death awaited. The Enlightenment and Thanatology. The early 19th century brought scientific rigor to subjects once considered sacred or profane, among them, the human corpse. The study of death, or thanatology, gained traction in France, with physicians and scholars attempting to understand not just how bodies decayed, but what death meant biologically, socially, even morally. Several professors from the École de Médecine de Paris were granted access to the ossuary for anatomical observation. Bones were measured, catalogued, sorted by age and condition. Some believed they could trace occupational patterns in femur density or skull thickness. A few went so far as to hypothesize class differences in the architecture of the skeleton, though such claims were soon dismissed as speculative pseudoscience. Still, the catacombs offered a rare cross-section of Parisian death. Mixed together were bones of plague victims, guillotine casualties, famine dead, and children lost to early disease. It was a democratized grave, a dataset of mortality. Romanticism descends. As the Enlightenment gave way to Romanticism, the tone of public engagement with the catacombs shifted. Where scientists had seen the ossuary as an archive of anatomy, artists and poets saw it as a temple of melancholy. Writers like Chateaubriand, Victor Hugo, and Gerard de Nerval all alluded to the catacombs, directly or indirectly, in their reflections on Paris. The space represented more than death. It was memory carved in stone, an emotional geography of absence. Painters and printmakers began to recreate the tunnels in etchings and watercolors. The mood was somber but sublime, lantern light against bone, arches of skulls vanishing into blackness, inscriptions reminding viewers of the fleeting nature of life. In 1815, a small pamphlet titled La Ville Souterraine circulated in literary salons. It was an anonymous fictional account of a man who had lost his way inside the ossuary, descending deeper into hallucination, despair, and finally transformation. Its blend of psychological horror and spiritual metaphor foreshadowed Gothic novels soon to come. Unregulated intrusions. Despite efforts to control access, illegal entrances began to appear. In the 1820s, Parisians discovered that certain wine cellars, particularly in the Montparnasse and Montrouge districts, had secret staircases or collapsed shafts that descended directly into the quarries. Some curious or defiant citizens used these passages to host underground salons, gatherings of students, writers, or libertines drawn to the thrill of forbidden descent. Police records from 1827 detail an incident in which a group of medical students hosted a séance inside the ossuary, lighting candles on a skull altar and reading aloud from the Book of Revelation. Though caught and fined, they insisted they were conducting an experiment in death psychology. That same year, the Préfecture de Police quietly increased surveillance at known entrances, but mapping the tunnels was still incomplete. The catacombs, stretching over 300 kilometers in total, remained partially unmapped and largely ungoverned. Ghosts, myths, and folklore. As access increased, so did rumors and legends. Some believed the ossuary was haunted by the spirits of plague victims, never given proper rites. Others swore they heard whispers in the galleries, or saw footprints that vanished in the dust. A recurring tale emerged of a lamplighter named Adrian, who was said to have become lost in 1831 and whose body was never recovered, only his lamp, still lit, discovered days later near the Wall of Bones. Another legend told of a woman, Madeleine de Flers, who wandered the tunnels for days after the death of her lover, eventually carving her initials into the stone before perishing. Her mark, according to some, can still be seen near the crypt of the Passion. Though historians dismiss these stories as apocryphal, they were repeated in journals, taverns, and schools, becoming part of the living folklore of the city. A city built on the dead. By 1830, over 6 million individuals had been interred in the catacombs. The ossuary extended in every direction beneath the left bank, beneath schools, shops, churches, and cafes. Parisians walked above the bones of their ancestors daily, often without knowing. Stones etched with the names of cemeteries still appeared: Saint Laurent, Saint Landry, Saint Marguerite. Each corridor whispered a different chapter of the city's dead. The dead were no longer isolated in cemeteries. They were woven into the city's foundation. Paris stood on a memory palace of skulls. The infiltrators of the underworld. By the mid-19th century, the catacombs had become more than a graveyard. They were a mystery, a challenge, an obsession. Despite increased regulation and the occasional closure for repairs or restorations, an expanding subculture of underground explorers, eventually known as cataphiles, began penetrating the labyrinth through forgotten entry points. Sewer grates, maintenance shafts, and old well covers offered secret access to the deep. Armed with candles, rope, and crude hand-drawn maps, these urban adventurers descended into darkness not to study death, but to experience the thrill of transgression, of immersion in something ancient and forbidden. The Paris Police Prefecture began to keep unofficial lists of known diggers and trespassers. Some were harmless thrill-seekers, others engineers testing boundaries, but a few became deeply involved in unauthorized excavations, carving new passages or uncovering old ones sealed decades prior. The disappearance of Philibert Aspert. One of the most enduring true stories from this era occurred in November 1793, though not fully documented until years later. A porter at the Val de Grace Hospital, Philibert Aspert, disappeared after reportedly entering the catacombs through a staircase near the hospital's crypt, carrying only a single oil lantern. He was searching, allegedly, for a hidden stash of chartreuse liqueur stored in old monastery tunnels. He never returned. 11 years later, in 1804, his skeletal remains were found by municipal workers, just meters from an exit. His body was identified by a keyring and fragments of clothing. His lantern lay beside him, out of oil. A simple plaque was later affixed to the wall where his body was found. It reads, "In memory of Philibert Aspert, lost in these quarries." Found 11 years later. It remains there to this day, a solemn marker of how easily the catacombs can swallow the living. The map makers and the madmen. Throughout the 19th century, efforts were made to map the entire underground system beneath Paris. Surveyors working under the Inspection Générale de Carrières painstakingly measured corridors, reinforced unstable ceilings, and catalogued crosspoints. They used plumb lines, oil lamps, and later acetylene torches to navigate the airless voids. But mapping was slow, and the underground was always changing. Water seepage, collapses, and illegal excavation created false passages and dead ends. Even well-documented tunnels were occasionally rendered impassable by mudslides or ceiling cave-ins. The complexity of the tunnel system led to a rise in amateur cartographers, many of whom drew and shared secret maps among explorers. These maps included names never marked on official records: the Chamber of Echoes, the Spiral Nerve, the Cabinet of Masks. Some maps included warnings, cryptic or poetic. Here the breath shortens. Don't turn left after the broken stone. The sleeping ones are near. Many were written in charcoal or scratched into the walls, temporary marks for temporary minds. The cults and the initiated. By the 1860s, stories began circulating of ritual gatherings in the deeper catacombs, some rooted in philosophy, others cloaked in secrecy. A discreet circle of intellectuals, students, and fringe mystics referred to themselves as les disciples de l'ombre, the disciples of shadow. They met twice yearly in a gallery known only to them, supposedly beneath the Jardin du Luxembourg. Their activities remain murky. Some claimed they read from Apollinaire and Baudelaire. Others insisted they conducted séances. One police informant suggested they drank wine from human skulls and chanted Latin hymns backwards. No arrests were ever made, but suspicion lingered. At the same time, Masonic lodges and occult groups occasionally rented legal access to certain catacomb sections for private ceremonies. Archival notes suggest a Masonic rite conducted in 1853 in the Crypt of the Apostles, involving a procession of robed men bearing candles and speaking in Greek. The boundary between ritual, performance, and hallucination was often thin in these underground spaces. Corpses in transit and accidental tombs. Accidents were inevitable. In 1842, a group of municipal workers became trapped for 2 days after a minor ceiling collapse. They had only 2 candles and a half-filled wineskin. When finally found, they were weak but alive, having scratched at the tunnel walls with belt buckles, trying to dig a way out. In 1871, during the brief but violent Paris Commune, rumors spread that communards were using the catacombs to move arms and plan resistance. Some tunnels were dynamited by the French army to prevent movement. To this day, those areas remain unstable and sealed with stone. A more tragic case occurred in 1897, when 2 boys, aged 12 and 14, slipped away from a school trip and disappeared into a side corridor. Their bodies were recovered 3 weeks later, just 30 meters from a known exit, curled together near an extinguished candle. Their deaths led to new restrictions on catacomb access, especially for schools and youth organizations. Echoes of the underground. By the late 19th century, the catacombs were no longer just a curiosity. They had become a shadow twin of the city. Parisians above lived lives of fashion, culture, and empire. Below, a skeletal archive persisted, untouched by time. In cafés and salons, rumors of strange chants, flickering lights, and encounters with gray figures persisted. These tales, whether urban myth or lived experience, were never formally documented, but they spread, always secondhand, always whispered. The catacombs were no longer just a tomb. They had become a stage, where the boundaries of history, memory, and imagination collapsed like the ceilings above. The catacombs on the brink of war. As Paris marched toward the 20th century, it carried with it not only innovation and grandeur, but a lingering fear that its foundations, both literal and societal, were fragile. The First World War would leave its scars on the psyche of Europe, but the catacombs remained largely undisturbed, their tunnels sealed and mostly silent. However, it was the Second World War that would resurrect the underworld into active relevance. By 1940, German forces had marched into Paris. Within days, the Nazi regime took administrative control of the city. Streets above echoed with jackboots and foreign orders, but below, hidden from view, a different kind of movement began. The French resistance found a natural shelter in the ancient bones of the city. German mapping and fortification. The Nazis, thorough and methodical, knew of the Parisian catacombs. German engineers studied pre-existing maps, surveyed key access points, and quickly established command bunkers in secured underground spaces. One such post was situated near Place d'Enfrochereau, only a short distance from the public entrance to the ossuary. This space, located roughly 25 meters underground, was fitted with telecommunication lines, reinforced doors, sleeping quarters, and provisions. It was used by elements of the Wehrmacht and the Gestapo as a contingency operations post, and possibly as a prison for short-term interrogation. Though the precise logs of its use remain sealed in wartime archives, the structural alterations remain. To prevent infiltration, the Nazis bricked off certain corridors, collapsed passages they deemed strategically vulnerable, and installed tripwires in others. The catacombs became, in a sense, a militarized maze, with the living dead of empire above and real death creeping below. The French resistance underground. Even as the occupiers secured sections of the catacombs, Parisian partisans, members of La Resistance, began to exploit their own knowledge of the tunnels. Many resistance members had been quarry workers, sewer inspectors, or students familiar with the Undercity's unofficial map. Operating in small units, often no more than 5 or 6 people, these resistance fighters used hidden entrances near Montsuris Park, Port d'Orleans, and the old Clamart Hospital to move through the tunnels undetected. They established message drops, sealed bottles wedged into cracks in the walls, safe houses, chambers converted into sleeping spaces, stocked with canned food and water, explosives caches, for sabotage of German vehicles or infrastructure, escape routes, for Jews, resistance figures, and Allied personnel needing passage out of the city. A resistance network known as Les Taupes the Moles operated almost exclusively underground. They mapped tunnel routes around German positions and warned operatives of impending raids. In one confirmed account, dated April 1944, a resistance group used the catacombs to coordinate the delivery of weapons to fighters stationed in the 14th arrondissement, bypassing 2 SS checkpoints undetected. Sounds in the dark. Veterans of the resistance would later speak of the psychological toll of operating underground. The constant presence of human remains was not the most disturbing aspect. Rather, it was the silence, broken only by the dripping of water and the occasional groan of shifting stone. Many described the peculiar way sound behaved in the catacombs. Footsteps echoed strangely, sometimes seeming closer than they were. Voices whispered around corners. On multiple occasions, resistance fighters believed they were being followed, only to find no one there. Some refused to enter alone. Superstitions flourished, even among hardened saboteurs. One unit refused to operate in a section beneath Rue Saint-Jacques, citing an old legend about a monk whose ghost could lead the living into sealed tombs from which there was no return. Still, the mission persisted. Allied collaboration and the liberation. In August 1944, Paris stood on the edge of liberation. As Free French forces and Allied troops approached the city, the catacombs were used to coordinate several underground assaults. Resistance fighters surfaced through storm grates and manholes to disable German supply routes and seize key buildings from below. One tunnel beneath Rue de Vaugirard, long believed collapsed, was used by partisans to reach a German fuel depot, where they planted timed charges that ignited a series of explosions on the eve of the city's liberation. When Paris was finally freed on August 25th, the city erupted in celebration. The catacombs, once again, receded into shadow, having played their part as silent allies in a war of shadows. Post-war discoveries and the remains of conflict. After the war, city engineers conducting inspections discovered German bunkers still intact, complete with rusted bunks, empty ration tins, and propaganda leaflets. Some tunnels showed signs of recent reinforcement, others bore marks of hasty retreat, burned maps, shredded documents, and unmarked crates. The French government, while acknowledging the role of the catacombs in wartime resistance, rarely publicized these underground operations. They were considered unofficial, unsanctioned, and carried out by individuals who had taken enormous risks without formal military command. But the cataphiles remembered. For years afterward, spray-painted slogans appeared near sealed catacomb entries. Mort pour la liberté, 1944. Nous sommes passés ici. The tunnels breathe freedom. The post-war slumber. Following World War II, the Paris catacombs fell once again into a period of relative stillness. The tunnels, now scarred by both centuries of decay and the secrets of wartime resistance, were sealed at multiple entry points. The Inspection Générale des Carrières (IGC) resumed its peacetime mission, stabilizing collapsing corridors, updating tunnel maps, and ensuring the city above remained intact. Public access to the ossuary resumed in a limited, curated fashion. Tourists descended on designated paths under supervision, kept far from the countless kilometers of unmapped or off-limits tunnels. The ossuary, the official sanitized face of the catacombs, became a neatly packaged historical attraction, presenting a version of death made palatable for public consumption. But the vast silent network beyond the tourist trail remained untouched, forgotten, and for some, irresistible. The birth of the modern cataphile movement. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, a new generation of Parisians began to reclaim the underworld, not as a burial site, but as a place of exploration, experimentation, and identity. These self-styled explorers called themselves cataphiles, from the Greek philos, lover, and kata beneath. They were not government workers, historians, or tourists. They were urban nomads, students, artists, anarchists, engineers, even off-duty policemen, drawn to the forbidden geometry of the underground. They entered through storm drains, metro service tunnels, sewer grates, and forgotten cellar staircases. Many entrances were known only by nickname: Le Trou de la Mort, Hole of Death, La Cheminie de Rats, Rat's Chimney, Port Zero, or Le Miroir, a shaft hidden behind a wall of broken tiles near a school in Montparnasse. Inside, they created a world completely distinct from life above. The map makers of the new underground. In the early 1970s, a group known as Les Cartographes Libres began to systematically explore and document the unmapped catacombs. Their hand-drawn maps were meticulous, updated constantly with graffiti, scratches, or symbols. Symbols developed their own meanings. A circle with a dot equals water source. 3 diagonal lines equals ceiling unstable. A triangle inside a square equals secret chamber nearby. An X with a single arrow equals false route, dead end. Maps were copied by hand, passed between explorers like sacred texts, folded in oilskin to keep out the damp. These were not for sale. To obtain one, you had to prove yourself, survive 3 journeys, contribute to the map's accuracy, or guide a new explorer without losing them. Each cataphile developed their own nickname: Mange Pierre, Céline, Lucien, Cassure. Names were whispered, sprayed in phosphorescent paint on the walls, or carved discreetly near landmarks deep in the network. The catacombs as living space. By the 1980s, cataphile culture had evolved into something more than exploration. Parts of the catacombs were being used for gatherings, installations, and even extended stays. Some chambers were fitted with sleeping mats, battery-powered lanterns, small cook stoves, and radios. One of the most legendary locations was La Plage, the beach, a long dry hall with sand-colored stone floors and candle niches carved into the walls. Another was Salle Z, an abandoned World War II-era bunker converted into an underground library, complete with folding chairs, crates of books, and a stone lectern. It wasn't uncommon to find bands performing impromptu concerts, poets holding readings lit by candelabras, painters creating vast murals by flashlight, photographers capturing scenes never meant to be seen. The catacombs had become a city within the city, bound not by laws, but by codes of respect and endurance. Conflicts with authority. The rise of cataphile activity didn't go unnoticed. In 1981, police discovered an illegal rave beneath Rue Riaumur. Over 200 people had gathered in a chamber known as La Salle du Carrefour, its walls painted with surrealist graffiti. Power had been drawn using a cable spliced from a metro junction, and the space had been wired with speakers and lights. The organizers escaped arrest through a hidden exit known as La Fissure. Afterward, the Préfecture de Police increased underground patrols. The Brigade de Mines et Carrières, a specialized unit, was formed to monitor activity and issue citations. But enforcement was difficult. The tunnels were vast. Patrols were rare. And cataphiles knew the passages better than the enforcers. Many cataphiles began playing a game of misdirection, sealing old paths with decoy symbols, erasing routes behind them with fresh rubble, building fake walls to confound pursuers. The underground became a battlefield of knowledge. The art of defiance. As cataphile presence grew, so did their contribution to underground art. Entire galleries of murals bloomed in forgotten halls, faces made from skulls, abstract spirals in blood-red paint, dragons coiling through limestone. There were collaborative installations, altars made from discarded metro seats, chandeliers hung from bone hooks, even stone-carved poetry embedded into tunnel walls. One chamber near Port d'Orléans featured a full-scale sculpture of a lion mid-roar, carved over a year by a sculptor known only as K. Another chamber was lined floor-to-ceiling with broken mirrors, giving the illusion of infinite space beneath the earth. These weren't just acts of creativity, they were statements of permanence within decay, of freedom beneath control. The secret cinema beneath Paris. In 2004, during a routine training drill, members of the Parisian police patrol entered a previously sealed chamber under the Trocadero, near the Seine's right bank. Expecting to find structural weakness or illegal excavation, they instead encountered a functioning underground cinema. The space was stunning, a vaulted stone chamber with tiered seating carved directly into the limestone, a fully operational projector, a bar area stocked with liquor, and a generator-powered lighting system. Painted on the wall near the entrance was the image of a large black cat wearing a film reel as a crown. No explanation, no artist's signature. Audio surveillance equipment was installed the following night. When officers returned days later, everything was gone. The generator, the seating cushions, the bar, even the cat mural had been painted over in gray. A note was left behind, nailed into the stone wall. Ne cherchez pas. Do not search. The press dubbed the incident La Salle de Cinéphages, the room of the film eaters. It wasn't the first time. Over the next several years, reports would surface of other ephemeral screening rooms beneath Paris. One near Gare d'Austerlitz, another under the Bibliothèque Nationale. Each vanished without a trace after discovery. Tech enters the underworld. By the early 2000s, the digital revolution reached even the world below. Cataphiles began carrying headlamps powered by lithium batteries, handheld GPS devices, and waterproof Bluetooth speakers. More significantly, they began documenting their explorations using digital cameras, camcorders, and later smartphones. Entire online subcultures emerged on anonymous forums like Urbex France, Le Souterrain, and encrypted IRC channels. Within them, users exchanged digital schematics, geotagged maps, underground graffiti tags, and logbooks detailing the discovery of previously undocumented chambers. Yet few of these materials ever surfaced in the mainstream. Access was tightly controlled. Some forums required applicants to submit original photos of named chambers to gain entry. Others imposed code words derived from Latin inscriptions found in the ossuary itself. In this way, a new form of digital secrecy emerged, one in which information was shared not freely, but according to a rite of passage. The Codex Souterrain. In 2009, a group of veteran explorers compiled the Codex Souterrain, an encrypted multi-layered digital archive accessible only through a physically passed thumb drive known as the CLE Noir, Black Key. Each key contained an evolving interactive 3D map of the tunnel network, audio recordings of ambient sounds from deep zones, a library of video walkthroughs of illegal chambers, a catalog of underground art, each entry geotagged and time-stamped, and crucially, a living document, a logbook written in multilingual fragments, French, Latin, Arabic, Esperanto, detailing cataphile discoveries, rituals, and warnings. Only a handful of CLE Noir drives are known to exist. They cannot be copied or uploaded without triggering a deadman protocol that wipes their content. They change hands silently, passed in metro stations, at art collectives, or left in dead drops near tunnel entries. The Codex, in essence, is a secret library of the modern underworld. New rituals and subcultures. In the 21st century, cataphiles began to splinter into distinct tribes, each with their own etiquette, aesthetics, and underground territories. The archivists, meticulous mappers, obsessed with preserving the memory of every gallery and inscription, often identified by chalk survey marks and photographic triptychs. The chimeres, performance artists and anarchists who staged midnight rituals, dance shows, or theatrical acts in underground amphitheaters, usually without audience or cameras. Les Murmurers, whisperers, a quiet group who avoid all electronic documentation, preferring candlelight, memory, and coded graffiti to mark their paths. Believed to be the keepers of the acoustic maps, navigating via resonance and echo. The codes, hackers and programmers who believe the catacombs form a natural neural network, a primitive but reactive superstructure that interacts with human presence in complex ways. They leave behind encrypted QR glyphs and data shards in resin-embedded stone. These groups often operated in parallel, but sometimes crossed paths. In rare instances, they collaborated, most notably in the creation of the Salle Inversée, a chamber deep under Porte de Vannes, where ceiling and floor were mirrored through sculpture, paint, and the placement of human bones to disorient spatial perception. Surveillance and subversion. The rise in underground digital activity eventually caught the attention of France's Central Directorate of Internal Intelligence, DCRI. Though their interest wasn't publicly acknowledged, leaks in 2011 revealed internal memos describing monitoring of encrypted forums, cataloging of cataphile symbols for graffiti identification, concerns about data caches hidden underground by whistleblowers, reports of foreign visitors participating in multi-day underground events with possible political motives. Yet enforcement remained minimal. The catacombs remained resistant to intrusion, not through brute defense, but through complexity, geography, and the collective memory of its keepers. Underground, time moved differently. Laws thinned. Ritual replaced regulation. The unmapped depths. By the 2010s, it was understood among serious cataphiles that no complete map of the Paris catacombs existed, not even within the archives of the Inspection Générale des Carrières, nor the secret databases of urban police. Beneath Paris, a portion of the network remained unmapped, sometimes referred to in whispered tones as La Zone Fantôme, the Phantom Zone. These areas were neither part of the public ossuary nor documented in official mining records. They lay deeper, past collapsed galleries, behind sealed corridors, or through labyrinthine choke points that required crawling on hands and knees for hundreds of meters. In these forgotten zones, time had stopped. Several cataphiles had ventured into these regions and returned with altered accounts, stories filled with discontinuities, missing hours, disorienting architecture. Some chambers were perfectly square, others curved unnaturally, defying the quarry's original structure. Walls bore no graffiti, no soot marks, no signs of passage. Just cold, undisturbed air. One explorer, known only by the alias Serpent, claimed in a 2013 interview that he entered a chamber under Rue Broca with two companions, turned left past a collapsed shaft, and re-emerged 17 hours later, having lost track of time. His flashlight batteries were full, and his watch had stopped at 2:12 a.m., a detail confirmed by all three. None remembered what had occurred in between. The Vault of 13 Steps. Among the more persistent legends of the Phantom Zone is the Vault of 13 Steps. Referenced in 3 separate hand-drawn maps from 1967, 1994, and 2006, the vault is said to be accessible only after passing a flooded corridor marked by 2 carved angel heads. Inside, a narrow spiral staircase of exactly 13 stone steps descends into a chamber with no apparent exit. At the center is a single massive stone sarcophagus, unmarked with no seam. Early reports suggest that the acoustics of the chamber are distorted. Whispers carry for minutes, yet footsteps make no sound. A photograph surfaced in 2011 on a now-defunct forum, showing a blurred image of a vaulted chamber with vertical striations on the wall and what appeared to be a crude etching of an hourglass without sand. No metadata was available. The user who posted it disappeared from the forum days later. Theories emerged. Some claimed it was a Napoleonic burial site. Others suggested it was a place of ancient pre-Roman worship, repurposed and sealed centuries before the ossuary began. No one has confirmed its location. Vanished individuals and unfiled reports. Beyond the urban legends, There are real disappearances linked to the catacombs, cases never officially classified as criminal, but whispered among cataphiles like half-forgotten prayers. In 1997, Thomas Berard, a geology student at the Sorbonne, failed to return from an unsanctioned solo descent. His last known location was an entrance near Rue Darrow, where a manhole cover was found ajar. Despite a week-long search, including drones and ground-penetrating sonar, no trace was ever found. In 2005, two amateur videographers entered the catacombs to document graffiti art near the Gallery of Echoes. Only one returned. The survivor, unnamed in police records, was reportedly incoherent, with memory loss, bruises, and signs of mild hypothermia. He claimed they had been watched from the walls, and heard voices speaking in Old French, reciting psalms. When he was later questioned again, he denied having said any of it. No charges were filed. His footage was confiscated by municipal authorities. That same year, a motion-activated camera installed by an art collective captured 11 frames of a figure walking alone through Chamber D47, barefoot, without a light source. The footage abruptly cut to black. The collective never returned to the site. Subsonic frequencies and acoustic anomalies. Some of the cataphiles who frequent the deepest zones report physical symptoms: nausea, dizziness, feelings of dread, or sudden nosebleeds. Several engineers proposed a theory in 2016, the presence of low-frequency sound waves, or infrasound, generated by air pressure differences or subterranean seismic shifts. Infrasound, typically below 20 Hz, can cause disorientation, hallucinations, and unease. The theory suggested that certain chambers in the catacombs could act as natural resonators, amplifying these waves. When aligned with narrow tunnels, they could produce pockets of acoustic pressure, disorienting those inside. A team from École Normale Supérieure conducted informal tests in a chamber known as Le Dôme, a 10-meter-tall spherical cavity discovered in 2002. Microphones recorded a consistent low-frequency pulse at 17.2 Hz, inaudible to humans, but possibly enough to affect physiology. This zone was later sealed. The Chamber of Virescence. In 2018, explorers unearthed an anomalous space near Parc Montsouris, later dubbed Chamber de la Virescence, the Green Chamber. What made it unusual wasn't just its isolation, but the presence of living vegetation. Tiny ferns and lichen clung to the damp walls, their chlorophyll faintly glowing in ultraviolet light. The humidity was extreme, and the chamber emitted a constant dripping sound from unseen sources. A small pool had formed at the center, emitting a faint sulfurous odor. No airflow could be detected. Water samples retrieved showed high mineral content, but no bacteria. The cataphiles who discovered it left a single tag on the wall: La nature reprend meme les morts. Nature reclaims even the dead. By the time another group arrived 3 weeks later, the chamber's walls had been stripped clean, the plants dead, the pool dried. The rise of esoteric activity. By the early 2020s, the Paris catacombs had become more than an underground network of bones and tunnels. They were evolving into a living spiritual architecture, a space where symbols, silence, and structure converged to serve not merely exploration or art, but belief. Some of the more devoted cataphiles, many of them academic dropouts, polyglot historians, or fringe mystics, began referring to the deep catacombs not as quarries or ossuary, but as le corps souterrain, the underground body. The metaphor wasn't poetic. It was literal. To them, the catacombs functioned as a liminal organism, with symbolic organs: heart, lungs, spine, memory. This shift wasn't religious in a traditional sense. It was ritualistic, symbolic, experiential. Not faith, but immersive conviction. The 12 altars and the zodiac path. A persistent theme among esoteric explorers was the discovery, or possibly creation, of what they called the 12 altars, 12 altars, a sequence of chambers spaced throughout the southern network, each corresponding to an astrological sign and arranged in a slow arc, from Aries near Parc Montsouris to Pisces near the far edge of Rue de Tolbiac. Each chamber featured a hand-carved stone plinth or circle, symbols chiseled into the wall, often aligned with planetary glyphs. Graffiti tags dated years apart, but often returning to the same phrases. Sous-le respire. This place breathes. Les os vibrant. The bones vibrate. In the Chamber du Lion Leo, an 8-pointed star was carved into the floor. Burn marks radiated from the center, and remnants of candle wax were recovered from shallow niches. A single vertebra, polished smooth, had been embedded into the ceiling. No one could explain how it was fixed there without modern tools. Scholars from alternative archaeology circles began proposing that the layout was deliberate, that it matched celestial maps of 1347, the year the Black Death first entered Paris. Though dismissed by academics, some cataphiles believed these 12 points formed a ritual zodiacal path, to be walked in a specific order, at specific times of the year, echoing the procession of the heavens. The language of walls, glyphs and stone markings. Certain zones of the catacombs began showing non-graffiti inscriptions, not paint, but deep etchings into the limestone, often with crude but deliberate precision. These were not tags, dates, or initials. They followed patterns. Spiral crosses. Forked lines ending in dots. Repeated triangles arranged like constellations. One such wall, discovered near the Passage de la Lanterne, displayed over 200 repeating marks, arranged in vertical columns like cuneiform or ancient numerical systems. The markings resisted translation but bore similarities to pre-Latin Ligurian glyphs, found in caves near Marseille and northern Italy. Rumors spread of a man named Nerthus, who spent 7 years tracing and cataloging these symbols. He kept no digital records, only black journals filled with rubbings and sketches. His notebooks, last seen in 2021, reportedly contained a reference to a lost corridor known only as Suture 9. His current whereabouts are unknown. The Rite of Descent. At least 3 independent groups have claimed knowledge of a formalized ritual known as Le Rite de la Descente, the Rite of Descent. Not a single codified ceremony, but a progressive initiation conducted entirely within the catacombs, often over several months. Participants, initiates, were given locations to find, tasks to complete, and silence to maintain. They were required to spend a night alone in a known chamber of death, often near the skull cross. Retrieve a bone fragment from an anonymous corridor and return it to a designated plinth. Fast for 24 hours before descending into the zone called Lunent, the Void, where no lights were permitted, and navigation was done by rope and sound. Those who completed the rite were said to be lit by the wall, and took on new names, never spoken aloud above ground. Their reward was not status, but a change in perception. Several described the tunnels afterward as alive, watching, not empty. Though unverifiable, stories from participants are strikingly similar. Multiple accounts mention hearing a faint rhythmic hum beneath their feet, strongest in chambers without air movement or outside interference. The Mosaic of Silence. One of the most mystifying discoveries occurred in 2019, in a deep, difficult-to-access corridor southeast of Place d'Italie, dubbed Le Mur Muet, the Mute Wall. The corridor ended in a flat, featureless limestone wall. But in torchlight, it revealed a tessellated surface, thousands of tiny stone fragments embedded to form a full-length mosaic, depicting a faceless human figure curled into itself, encircled by a ring of wolves, each in a different phase of motion. The work was constructed entirely from stone not native to Paris, volcanic black rock, slate, and pale marble chips, likely brought in over years. There were no tool marks, no artist's signature, no graffiti. The space was absolutely silent. No echoes. No footsteps. Even breath seemed absorbed. The figure in the mosaic, once seen, reportedly appeared again, painted onto walls deeper in the system, sometimes months later, always slightly altered in posture. A crawling figure. A kneeling one. Once, upside down. No one has ever claimed authorship. Those who witness the mosaic are expected not to speak of its location. Ownership in the depths. The legal status of the Paris catacombs is complicated. The publicly accessible ossuary, located in the 14th arrondissement, managed by Les Musées de la Ville de Paris, is regulated, ticketed, and overseen by curators and municipal engineers. It represents only 1.7 kilometers of the estimated 300-plus kilometers of subterranean tunnels. The remainder? Officially categorized as carrières souterraines, underground quarries, under the jurisdiction of the Inspection Générale des Carrières, IGC. This organization, founded in the 18th century, is charged with monitoring geological stability beneath the capital. However, while the IGC can inspect, map, and seal tunnels, it does not own the catacombs, nor does any single government body. Some tunnels fall under municipal properties, others beneath private buildings. Some straddle state-owned parcels, historical zones, or metro systems. The underground is a mosaic of invisible ownership, stitched with uncertainty. This fragmentation leads to legal blind spots. If someone is injured, lost, or dies underground in an unregulated area, no single office is responsible. These areas are not considered public space, nor private property. They exist in legal ambiguity. The police and the forbidden map. The Brigade de Repression de l'Infiltration Clandestine de Carrières, BRIC, a specialized police unit, was established in 1980 in response to the explosion of illegal underground activity. Tasked with patrolling known entrances and issuing fines, the BRIC operates with limited personnel and a reliance on tip-offs. They are often referred to by cataphiles as les rats en uniforme. Encounters between officers and explorers tend to be quiet, polite, and without arrest, unless vandalism, theft of bones, or destruction of property is involved. Yet among the cataphiles, rumors persist that the BRIC holds a forbidden map, a complete schematic of the underground, compiled over decades and restricted even from city officials. Supposedly annotated with collapse-prone galleries, sealed war bunkers, and ritual chambers, this map is whispered of like a myth, le plan noir. Some claim that certain zones are intentionally left unmapped, not for safety, but to protect specific histories, zones associated with revolutionary executions, plague pits, or medieval excommunications. These are said to be too dark for public exposure. No copy has ever surfaced. But certain sealed iron gates, marked only with a number and the letters RN, Raison non identify, suggest something organized, something hidden. The ethical dilemma, bones as material. One of the most contested aspects of catacomb culture is the ethical use and misuse of human remains. While the official ossuary presents an orderly, reverent arrangement of skulls and femurs, the surrounding tunnels are often littered with loose bones, scattered fragments, and disassembled skeletons. Some have been displaced by erosion or collapses. Others have been moved, repurposed, or even integrated into art installations. Cataphiles remain deeply divided. For some, the catacombs are a sacred archive. Disturbing the bones is a desecration. These explorers document and respect, often restacking dislodged remains with care. They refer to the dead as les silencieux, the silent ones, and greet them upon entry. For others, particularly those involved in underground art or esoteric traditions, the bones are active participants. They are symbolic material, not static relics. One collective known as l'Ordre de la Pierre vide reportedly rearranged femurs into geometric mandalas in a chamber dubbed La Crypte de Nombres, believing the act reawakens ancestral memory encoded in mineral. Such practices raise ethical concerns. Do the remains of the anonymous poor deserve ritual respect, even centuries later? Are they artifacts or ancestors? Can the dead be used in acts of expression without their consent? French law prohibits removal or display of human remains without authorization. But enforcement is rare, and the boundary between reverence and violation remains blurred. Preservation versus ruin. The limestone of the catacombs is not immortal. Water seeps, mineral leaches, and graffiti paint flakes into dust. Structural supports erode. Some chambers collapse entirely, sealing themselves forever. Conservation efforts are sporadic. The ossuary is regularly maintained, its bones dusted and its walls reinforced with steel bracing. But the larger network, the forgotten mines, the silent galleries, remains largely unmanaged. Some argue that the tunnel should be left to decay naturally, allowed to return to silence as stone reclaims the void. Others advocate for preservation, 3D scans, photogrammetry, even virtual reality mapping to immortalize the disappearing underground. A third, quieter group believes that the catacombs should never be fully mapped or recorded, insisting that mystery is essential to the spirit of the place. For them, the catacombs are a mirror of the unconscious, and overexposure would kill its meaning. In 2022, an anonymous collective began embedding small QR codes into obscure tunnel corners. Scanning them leads to audio recordings, low whispered readings from Apollinaire, Rimbaud, and Sade, layered over subterranean noise. The project is called Tombe Numérique. There is no website, no credits, just a message. Cela n'est pas pour être sauvé. Il est pour être entendu. This place is not to be saved. It is to be heard. The archivist, Marcel Laurin. Marcel Laurin was never a famous historian, never published a book, nor appeared on television. Yet, among cataphiles and quarrymen alike, his name is spoken with reverence. Born in 1949, He worked for 30 years as a municipal surveyor for the city of Paris, tasked with inspecting underground tunnels for signs of collapse or instability. He was quiet, methodical, and kept notebooks filled with diagrams and notations that would never be seen in a public office. Over decades, he walked more than 200 kilometers underground, almost entirely alone. What set Laurent apart wasn't just his knowledge, it was his compulsion to remember. He treated each chamber like a page in a book, assigning them names based not on maps but sensations. Chamber to sea, woven room, for a vaulted gallery where tree roots pierced the ceiling in symmetrical patterns. Le couloir sail, salted passage, where mineral crusts formed lace-like stalactites on every surface. He kept no digital records. His notebooks, 26 in total, were written in graphite, annotated with pressed wildflowers found near tunnel mouths, and maps drawn in red pencil. These were entrusted to a younger cataphile in 2015, on Laurent's 66th birthday, during a midnight ceremony in the Chapel of Ribs. He died a year later, above ground, in his Montreal apartment. His ashes, per his request, were scattered in a limestone shaft that he called Le Silence Complete. To this day, his notebooks are passed hand to hand, never copied, never scanned. They're referred to as Le Corpus Laurent, and finding one is considered a rite of passage. The stonemason, Aisha Ben Salem. Aisha was not an explorer, she was a worker. In the late 1980s, she was part of the IGC's reinforcement teams, hired to stabilize a collapsing section under Rue de Tolbiac. A trained stonemason, she spent hours below the city sealing microfractures, installing support columns, and mixing limecrete in the dark. Unlike her colleagues, she took photographs, not of herself, but of walls. She believed the stone had memory, and her photologs tracked how moisture stains moved, how certain carvings shifted subtly over time. In 1993, during a maintenance assignment in Gallery M22, Aisha found a chamber entirely walled in, no entrance, no ventilation, and yet dry, dustless. The stonework was too precise, she noted. Not 18th century. Not quarryman. Someone else. She never disclosed the location, only leaving a 6-digit coordinate string in her private files, handwritten beside a Polaroid of a wall etched with diagonal lines. She resigned from the IGC in 1997, citing health concerns, and disappeared from public view. Her photos resurfaced years later, auctioned as part of an estate sale, many unlabeled. One, known only as Figure Reculi, shows a figure seated in darkness, head turned, limbs motionless. Whether it's a statue, a person, or a trick of exposure has never been confirmed. The original photo was stolen from the gallery that displayed it in 2012. No security footage was recovered. The guide who never returned. In the winter of 2003, a guide known among cataphiles only as Lou led a party of 4 into an undocumented corridor near the Passage de El Hematome, a deep, narrow stretch prone to collapse. The group was well prepared: backup lights, ropes, rations, and a known exit strategy through Zone N. According to the 3 who returned, Lou had stepped into a tight fissure that looked like a bypass around a rubble choke. He signaled for them to wait, slid in, and never emerged. They searched for 4 hours. No sound, no echo. Just a tight, limestone slit descending at a slope too steep to follow. They marked the entrance and returned with help 2 days later, but the passage had shifted, as if it had never been there. What had once been a crawlspace was now a solid wall, caved in from the inside. His name was never published. Among cataphiles, they sometimes say, "Il est passé derrière la pierre." He passed behind the stone. Lou's chalk tag, a simple circle with a diagonal slash, still appears in random galleries. No one knows who's marking them. The sculptor, Camille Dupré. Camille Dupré was a stone carver by trade, but among underground artists, she was a legend. Between 1998 and 2006, she created 9 sculptures hidden across the southern network. None bore her name. All were carved directly from the walls of untouched limestone galleries. A bust of a woman screaming, mouth filled with crushed mirror. A snake coiled around a hollow skull, facing downward. A child's hand holding a tooth. A pair of boots, real ones, calcified with stone, sealed in a niche. Her most well-known work was Le Sommel Asleep, found in a chamber near Rue de la Santé, showing 2 life-sized figures curled into each other, eyes closed, fused at the shoulder by a single twisted arm. They were so lifelike that explorers thought they had found corpses. Camille disappeared in 2007, after sending an anonymous letter to a Paris newspaper. I have created memory in stone. If it disappears, so will I. One of her pieces was destroyed during reinforcement work in 2010. In the following weeks, 2 others were quietly removed by unknown parties. Some say she returned and reburied them. Others believe they were never real to begin with, that her name was a mask for multiple artists working in coordination. No confirmed photos of Camille exist. The vocabulary of the hidden. The deeper catacombs of Paris, untouched by tourism or official signage, have long nurtured a linguistic ecosystem of their own, silent, coded, spoken in fragments. Language underground is not linear, not bound by grammar or even consistency. It mutates. Among cataphiles, communication shifts between visual symbols, spoken tags, and what they call Mormons wall words. These are brief, often cryptic inscriptions etched or painted onto stone, conveying meanings that outsiders might miss entirely. Some are simple. A single blue dot, potable water nearby. A looped triangle, chamber used for sleep. A red dash across a skull, remains not to be disturbed. Others are metaphorical, performative, like double arrows joined at the base, meaning the long way is the only way. These marks are not standardized, but passed down orally or through initiation, giving rise to a semi-private patois of symbols. This vocabulary forms what some call the souterrain cant, not a full language, but a symbolic lexicon shared among a community bound by place, not voice. Fragments of forgotten tongues. Beyond symbols, some explorers have reported encountering inscriptions in obsolete languages, Old Occitan, Ecclesiastical Latin, and even coded French dialects in used since the 16th century. Whether these were quarrymen's graffiti, remnants of revolutionary codes, or deliberate postmodern artifacts remains unknown. One chamber south of Rue Saint-Jacques contains over 20 lines of carved script. It appears to be a hybrid of early modern French and ecclesiastical Latin, scratched into soot-blackened stone with bone or metal. Translation yields nonsensical phrases interspersed with chilling clarity. The marrow remembers. Voices are pressed into dust. Do not bring mirrors. They bring him closer. There is no attribution. No date. Just the text, half buried behind calcified waterlines. The songs that are not sung. One of the most mysterious oral traditions among certain cataphile circles is the phenomenon of chant recall, the ritualized recitation of non-melodic phrases that resemble song, but lack meter or rhyme. These are often whispered, monotone, and performed in specific acoustic chambers where the voice echoes back not as repetition, but distortion. These aren't sung for audience or record, but for resonance, to activate the gallery, in the words of one initiate. The most cited of these is known as the Cantique de l'Oubli, the Hymn of Forgetting. Its lyrics, as transcribed from oral testimony, are as follows. Stone has no name. Dust keeps no vow. We pass. We leave the door open. Let the breath walk. It is believed to be recited before sleeping in the catacombs, especially alone, and is intended to depersonalize the speaker, allowing them to blend into the chamber, to become part of the strata. A lesser-known but recurring melody appears in video logs, a 3-note hum, long-short long, repeated at intervals in deep galleries. Some believe this is a location marker, others a mnemonic device. It has no known origin. Myths told without names. In the absence of documentation, oral myths have evolved, passed between generations of explorers like echoes carved into air. These myths have no central narrator, only fragments, shared in pieces, each telling slightly altered from the last. One such myth is that of Loup Valier Sans-Yeux, the Watcher Without Eyes. Said to be a quarryman who fell during a collapse in 1763 and never died, his spirit walks only in pitch-dark chambers. He can only be heard, not seen. If he follows, you must not turn around. You must speak aloud your full name, twice, to be released from his attention. Another is the La Tête Basse, the head-down one. A presence said to dwell in flooded passages. Not a ghost, but a feeling, the sensation that your head bows involuntarily when approaching certain corridors. The term has evolved into a code phrase for dangerous galleries. Cette salle est basse. This chamber is low. More symbolic than literal, the myths serve a navigational role, teaching danger, humility, and silence. They are not told for fear, but for structure. The role of silence. If language above ground is used to assert identity and presence, Language underground is often built around silence. The practice of remaining quiet in key areas, especially near ossuary intersections, long tunnels, or memorial walls, is deeply respected. Cataphiles refer to these areas as zones d'écoute, listening zones. One is located near the spiral of vertebrae, a dry hall where whispers never echo. Another is the chamber de murmures, where even footsteps seem muffled. In these spaces, silence is not absence, it's communication. It's said that bones respond to silence, that they lean toward quiet breath, that disturbances are less about volume and more about intention. Silence in the catacombs is not emptiness. It is an active presence, a medium for meaning, a boundary that speaks. Spatial dislocation. The human brain isn't designed to navigate environments with no light, no horizon, and no natural cues. In the catacombs, perception bends. Linear time becomes uncertain. Cataphiles often report temporal drift, where hours pass in minutes or moments stretch into hours without any sensory markers to measure them. Some zones are infamous for this. In particular, Gallery 143D, deep beneath Port d'Orléans, is called La Courbe, the curve, not because of any bend in the tunnel, but because time itself feels looped. Explorers speak of walking 10 minutes in what feels like half a day. Conversations echo oddly, with one explorer hearing her own voice reply before she spoke. In 2017, two cataphiles, known as Sphinx and Jab, documented a continuous 4-hour journey via headcam footage. The time code was stable. But on review, sections appeared in reverse, even though the explorers confirmed they never turned back. Their footsteps matched both directions. No cuts, no edits. Just movement that didn't align with intention. The footage was submitted to a cognitive dissonance lab in Lyon. Researchers could not explain the phenomena, other than suggesting it might be the result of ambient magnetic distortion affecting orientation, or infrasound dissociation. Neither explorer returned to that gallery. The recurring room. Among cataphiles, tales circulate about a chamber that shouldn't exist more than once, but does. It's described with consistency. A short hall, no wider than a train car, with half-finished arches, one side wet to the touch, and a metal rod protruding from the wall at shoulder height. No markings. No graffiti. Always silent. This room has been encountered. 50 meters under Place de Louisiana Nation. Again beneath Montparnasse. And a third time near the Catacombs de Clamart, nearly 6 kilometers west. Each explorer marked the room, but upon returning with others, the room was gone, replaced by rubble or blank wall. Some believe it's not a real space, but a manifestation of disorientation. Others claim it appears only when the catacombs fold inward, a term used not in geometry, but psychology. They call it la salle reflectie, the reflective room, not because it mirrors, but because you find yourself alone even when not alone. One journal entry from 2020 reads, "I was with Elise. I know I was. But in that room, I couldn't remember her face. I looked at her and she looked back, but it felt like she wasn't anyone." Hallucinations and stone memory. Exposure to low light, low oxygen, and isolation can trigger hallucinations, but in the catacombs, reports often cluster by location, not condition. Explorers experience similar visual or auditory phenomena in the same spots, despite arriving years apart. The Chamber of Veils, located off a low corridor near Rue Babolat, is only accessible through a shoulder-width breach in the wall. Inside, visitors describe thin, moving shapes at the edge of their vision, like fabric stirred by air, despite the total stillness. Others report voices, never aggressive, but questioning, a single word, repeated from behind. Often. Encore. Again. A group of sound engineers who mapped frequencies in this chamber in 2018 discovered standing sonic waves at precisely 19 Hz, a known fear frequency capable of inducing dread, nausea, and visual distortion. The waves were strongest when standing in the eastern alcove, weakest near the breach. Their study ended abruptly when a crew member refused to re-enter, citing a memory that doesn't belong to me. The corridor that repeats. One of the oldest cataphile legends, now decades old, concerns the Galerie du Recommencement, the corridor of restarting. It begins innocently, a straight walk, walls unmarked, gravel underfoot. But after 15 to 20 minutes of walking, explorers report passing the same stain, the same crack, the same pebble moved earlier. Not similar, identical. Some try to mark the walls, Chalk, spray paint, broken tiles, but the marks vanish after a full loop. They never find a turn or junction. Eventually, explorers panic, turn back, and find the entrance has shifted. Not vanished, just no longer where they expect. The corridor collapses behind them, or remains, or shifts again. One cataphile, a mathematician known only as Cylon, attempted to map the phenomenon using breadcrumb GPS loggers in 2016. When the loggers were retrieved, they showed a looping path across 4 quadrants, intersecting at impossible angles, sectors that should have required breaking through bedrock to access. He called it a non-Euclidean slip. His paper, unpublished, ended with a single sentence: "Either the tunnels moved, or I did." Time capsules and future graffiti. In stark contrast to these phenomena, some explorers intentionally engage with time by leaving traces for the future, hidden in sealed-off galleries or buried beneath stone caches. Known as memoirs mortes, these deposits often contain photographs, journals, soil samples, encrypted USB drives, capsules of air from specific years, sealed and labeled. One collective, calling themselves Les Minas de l'Aube, Miners of the Dawn, leaves temporal graffiti in UV-reactive ink. Their work cannot be seen in regular light, only under specialized lenses. Dates appear that do not yet exist. Some corridors bear stamps. 2027, Déjà Venu. 2027, already came. Others bear cryptic future phrases. La quatrième pluie. Marche sans poids. Revenez quand tout sera blanc. No interpretations are given. They aren't meant to be understood now. They're designed to wait. The catacombs as a cognitive field. Over time, experienced explorers began to speak less of the tunnels and more of the effect. Not just the influence of isolation, nor the psychology of darkness, but a convergence between the mind and the structure itself. The notion grew that the catacombs were more than an environment. They were a reactive presence, shaping perception, absorbing memory, and mirroring interior states. One anonymous report, penned in 2018 by a former neuroscientist turned cataphile, proposed that the catacombs were mimetic, not sentient, not mystical, but receptive, like a limestone neural network. According to this theory, chambers with heavy psychic or emotional imprint retain a trace, not visible, but experiential, encoded in pattern and silence. He called them chambers d'impressions, impression rooms. These spaces are neither marked nor mapped. They are recognized only by feeling, intense familiarity, déjà vu, a sudden emotional flood without origin. The room that knows you. Several individuals have reported entering galleries they'd never visited, only to experience detailed dreams of them later, in reverse, dreams that seem to precede the experience, not follow it. Others speak of entering a chamber and recalling conversations they never had, spoken by voices they don't recognize. One such space, located near Gallery C107, is referred to as La Salle de Pensées Retournées, the room of reverse thoughts. Explorers claim they enter with a plan but forget it instantly. Words form in their heads, unbidden, with syntax unlike their own. Some see fragments of handwriting glowing faintly on the walls, only legible when read in motion. One noted passage read, "Your thought is not your own. It passed here before you." Efforts to document these phenomena have failed. Written memories taken underground often differ from recollections once back above. An experiment conducted in 2021, in which 2 explorers journaled simultaneously while in the same room, revealed divergent experiences. They described 2 entirely different chambers, though they stood in the same space. Psychic anchors and thought objects. In some circles, explorers deliberately leave behind memoir fixations, objects imbued with specific thought forms or intentions, intended to affect the mental state of future visitors. These are not souvenirs or markers, but psychic artifacts, left in silence, placed with care. Common examples include small mirrors blackened with soot, facing walls. Rusted keys bound in red thread. Pages torn from journals, with sentences half erased. Sealed notes with instructions not to open until after the silence moves. These objects are placed in locations known as nodes mental knots, spots where attention seems to stick. A step slows. A turn lingers. These knots are never in the same place for everyone. Some believe these anchors work like rituals in reverse. Instead of casting something outward, they pull thought inward, concentrating emotion into a physical trace, like static charge in a sealed room. The collective memory effect. Over time, a theory emerged, whispered among longtime explorers, that the catacombs themselves build a cumulative memory, not of individuals, but of patterns. Every repetition, every path walked thousands of times, leaves a trace. Not in the walls, but in the way the air feels. The silence thickens. This concept, referred to as la mémoire froide, the cold memory, posits that the catacombs learn through frequency. The more often a space is visited, the more it becomes self-directing, bending perception to match the expectations of the walker. In Gallery 97O, a corridor traveled hundreds of times by the same group, a peculiar shift was noted. A wall that had long been featureless slowly began to show the outline of something, a pattern, too faint to photograph, but perceptible under oblique light. When traced by hand, the form felt like a labyrinth. Days later, it was gone. A chalk inscription appeared in its place, not from any group member. La pierre est souvient de l'habitude. The stone remembers the habit. The unspoken theory, thought extraction. Some more radical members of the cataphile community hold to a hidden belief, rarely stated outright, that the catacombs harvest thought. They speculate that every impression left behind, every intense emotion, every internal monologue shouted into the quiet, feeds something unseen. Not alive. Not divine. But real. These individuals follow a strict code while inside. No speaking unless necessary. No reflection while underground. No photography in soft chambers. Never write inside. Only observe. Do not return to a room if you dream about it first. This belief is not spiritual. It is cautionary. These cataphiles view the catacombs not as a place of death, but as a memory system so old it no longer knows how to forget. One explorer, who vanished in 2019, left behind a final note in the Sal Miroir. We are not meant to carry everything we think. Some things fall behind us. Some things wait. The unearthed angles. Among the most disquieting phenomena reported in the Paris catacombs are the anomalous architectural features, corridors, chambers, and stone formations that do not match the known quarrying patterns, historical records, or practical purpose of the tunnels. In standard quarry galleries, the walls are tool-marked, often symmetrical, rectangular or rounded, with predictable angles and supporting pillars. But deep in unpatrolled sections of the network, particularly under the southern arrondissements, far from tourist paths, explorers have described spaces with geometry that resists cataloging. In 2020, a cataphile called Noel 3, mapping an extension of Gallery 124H, discovered a chamber with a nine-sided shape nonagonal, but with no apparent ceiling join, and no corresponding structure above ground. The walls, roughly carved, bore no tool marks. The air was still, oddly warm. Measurements taken with a laser rangefinder returned inconsistent data. Some walls recorded at 3.2 meters, others at 2.9, then 3.6, though they appeared identical by sight. Light within the chamber behaved unevenly. Shadows fell in multiple directions. Photographs returned washed out, or blurred at the edges. Within 2 weeks, the entrance passage collapsed. Noel's field notes were preserved. They end with a line written vertically in the margin. It doesn't seem old. It seems forgotten. The staircase without entry. Multiple independent reports from 2009 to 2018 reference a peculiar anomaly known only as l'escalier inverse, the inverted staircase. According to accounts, it is not a traditional stairwell but a spiral descent carved upside down into the ceiling, leading nowhere. It appears in a narrow shaft near Rue du Banquier, accessible only by a floor-level breach behind a concrete utility wall. Those who reach it describe the stone as darker than the surrounding limestone, almost basaltic. The stair's orientation suggests it could not be descended. It moves upward, into solid rock, with steps spaced irregularly. There are no tool marks, no soot. At the base, a circular groove runs along the floor, as if something once rotated. A chalk note was found near the wall. Ce n'est pas un escalier. C'est un mold. It's not a staircase. It's a mold. The space was sealed in 2019 due to structural instability. No official survey was published. The antechamber of asymmetry. In Chamber 19K, catalogued in part by Les Cartographes Libres, lies what is referred to as La Chambre Plie, the folded room. It breaks with all architectural precedent in the catacombs. Its shape is neither rectangular nor trapezoidal. The room leans. The ceiling slopes diagonally into the floor. When standing at its center, explorers report a profound vertigo, even with lights fixed. Some describe a subtle pressure against the inner ear, others a sensation that their limbs are not aligned. A geologist consulted by Cataphiles in 2016 suggested the chamber may have formed due to an unusual torsional stress during quarrying collapse, but acknowledged there was no precedent for such precise irregularity in man-made mining. The chamber contains no bones, no markings. Just one object, a stone sphere, roughly 17 centimeters in diameter, lodged into a floor depression. It has not been moved. No one has dared. One visitor, years later, wrote anonymously, "Everything in that room makes your body want to leave, but your mind stays. It feels like someone else's memory of standing." The room beneath the room. There is a persistent story told among veteran explorers of a site known simply as Le Duxième Sol, the second floor. Unlike typical layered quarries, which descend in visible strata, this zone is accessed not by steps or shafts, but by fall-through chambers, thin floors that crack silently under pressure. In 2012, 2 explorers in Gallery G49 reportedly fell through such a fracture, landing in an unseen space below. The lower room was nearly identical in shape to the gallery above, but reversed. The arches were upside down, as if the room were cast from the same mold, then inverted. The lower room had no exits, no drafts, no signs of cave-ins. The explorers climbed out with rope, marking the walls before leaving. When a third visit was attempted the next week, the floor was solid. No opening, no trace of a collapse. The chamber was as it had always been, singular. The report was filed in an internal zine, Le Vainographe, and quietly retracted 6 months later. The corridor without approach. Deep in the southwestern quarries, between Rue Didot and Rue de Vouille, is a passage referred to as Le Couloir Impossible, the Impossible Corridor. It appears on no official maps, yet is referenced obliquely in multiple cataphile field books by initials alone, CI, always surrounded by warning marks. What makes this corridor anomalous is its approach mechanics. It cannot be reached directly. Explorers trying to reach it from known adjacent galleries report a shift in space. The corridor either extends beyond expected length, or the adjoining tunnels loop back to their origin. GPS trackers become unreliable. Timed walks return to starting points without logical turns. One group, in 2015, claims to have reached the entrance by accident. It was described as a narrow corridor of absolute symmetry, walls polished, unlike any other in the network. After walking for what they recorded as 8 minutes, they heard a single metallic chime, despite carrying no metal. They returned the way they came. The entrance no longer existed. Post-exposure phenomena. For many cataphiles, the catacombs are not left behind when the surface is regained. Accounts accumulate of mental shifts, sensory changes, and behavioral alterations following prolonged or repeated exposure to specific zones underground. These effects are not tied to the trauma of navigation, nor are they consistent with claustrophobia or hypoxia. They are persistent and specific, manifesting days, sometimes weeks after a deep descent. Documented changes include sleep disruption, recurring dreams of walking tunnels not yet visited, visual bleed, momentary perception of flickering shadows in peripheral vision, even in daylight, auditory residue, short-lived instances of dripping water, whisper-like murmurs, or distant footsteps heard in quiet environments above ground, chronospatial confusion, subtle difficulty recalling the order of daily events or pinpointing specific locations during routine commutes. One recurring symptom is known informally as the echolag, a delayed internal playback of underground sounds hours after resurfacing. Described as hearing one's own words replayed at a distance, slightly distorted, especially in empty rooms. A cataphile known as a Corse kept a post-descent diary for 10 months. On his 6th recorded re-entry into the catacombs, he began referring to shifts, not of light or air, but of self. I return each time feeling offset by half a second, as if my actions reach the world before I do. The dislocated self. Several long-term explorers have described a phenomenon best translated as self-dislocation, a sensation that some internal part of them remained behind, even as they returned home, resumed work, or socialized. In extreme cases, explorers reported A sense that memories were being remembered by another version of themselves. Visualizations of underground paths superimposed onto waking life, as if parts of the city above were now connected by tunnels they couldn't see but somehow knew. Oral impressions of gallery acoustics re-emerging in unlikely spaces, stairwells, tunnels, subways. This detachment was not experienced as delusion, but as overlay, a dual awareness that refused integration. A teacher from the 13th arrondissement, who had explored for years under the alias Bleem, eventually wrote in a sealed blog, "The streets are tunnels now. I walk to work and feel like I'm moving through the wrong version of the city. I think I left the original somewhere under Denfert Trochereau." She stopped updating the blog in 2019. Her last post was a scan drawing, two identical maps of Paris, one inverted, overlapping the other at precise angles, with red slashes marked under major churches. Residue objects. Explorers have reported a compulsion to bring back items from the catacombs. Small, insignificant objects. Chips of limestone, rusted nails, shards of mirror, unmarked bottle caps. These are not souvenirs in the traditional sense. They are described as anchors, though none can say why they chose them. Once removed, these objects often become sources of fixation. They are placed in dark corners, inside drawers, on windowsills, and never touched again. But their presence is noted daily. One journal describes the returned object as a fragment with gravity. Another likens it to a magnet, attracting certain thoughts, or containing an unspoken instruction. Some report dreams in which the object has moved, though no evidence supports it. A photographer named Leo M., who brought back a limestone shard etched with an illegible glyph, later claimed, "It's not the stone that came back. It's the room it came from. It just needed something to follow." The shard was returned a year later, reburied near its original find site. The dreams stopped. The duality state. Among experienced cataphiles, particularly those involved in repeated deep descents, there emerges a condition referred to informally as la double veil, the dual waking. This state is characterized by a persistent awareness of two versions of self, one functional, surface-facing, one resonant, subterranean. Moments of sudden stillness or detachment in crowded places, described as a partial slip into the underself. A sensation that another version of themselves is walking elsewhere simultaneously, often downwards. During episodes, individuals often lose track of spoken conversation, become briefly unaware of their surroundings, or stare into reflective surfaces as if expecting to see something else looking back. These incidents do not escalate to psychosis. Rather, they fade, leaving behind the impression that one has touched a thread too briefly to follow. In interviews, several described it not as disturbing, but inevitable. You walk that far underground, something follows you up. Not a thing. A way of seeing. The quiet returners. A final category remains, those who stopped speaking of the catacombs entirely. Not from trauma, not from injury, but because their connection to the space became nonverbal. These are referred to by peers as les silencieux actifs, the active silent. They no longer carry maps. They descend alone, without light. They return without commentary. Their gear is worn, their routes unknown. When asked why they still go down, they do not answer. They are not unfriendly, only unreachable. They are recognized by a distant focus during conversation. Their refusal to photograph. The presence of unfamiliar glyphs appearing shortly after their known excursions. One was followed discreetly by a filmmaker during a 2022 descent. The subject entered via a forgotten storm drain near Rue Vercingetorix, disappeared for 11 hours, and re-emerged with nothing in hand. The only words spoken were, "It's not done yet." Beneath the quarry layer. Within certain catacomb sectors, specifically those that burrow deepest into the limestone plate beneath southern Paris, explorers have occasionally encountered stonework that predates all known quarrying activity. These findings defy classification. They are not aligned with medieval quarry lines, nor do they conform to Roman-era construction or Gallic stone-cutting traditions. First-hand accounts describe encountering walls built from stone types not quarried in Ile-de-France, veined basalt, porphyry fragments, and polished gabbro, materials foreign to the region's natural composition. These walls are typically short and freestanding, never load-bearing or connected to support structures. They rise only to shoulder height, often slanted at odd, seemingly deliberate angles. They do not collapse or shift, as if anchored by non-visible means. Some appear to emit residual warmth, measurable only by skin, not instruments. The term used by some cataphiles is les murs sans époque, walls without era. The glyph chambers of Clamart. In 2016, a sealed section under Clamart, long thought collapsed, was opened by 3 experienced explorers via a bypass tunnel. What they found was a cluster of small interlinked rooms, each carved with deep, swirling symbols. The symbols were neither decorative nor alphabetical. Each one was carved as though spiraled inwards, with a start point that vanished into the stone, impossible to trace. Measuring tools could not map the lines properly. Their curvature seemed to change based on the observer's position. No bones were found in these rooms. No graffiti. No mineral staining. The air was completely dry, a rarity in such depths. The walls were cold but resisted condensation, behaving unlike standard limestone. Only one photograph was taken. It showed a room with a trilobed ceiling, unlike any known tunnel in the Paris network. The photo disappeared from the encrypted folder where it was stored. Only a thumbnail remained, blurred, indecipherable. The chamber was quietly resealed. The explorers never spoke publicly about it again. The sloped Hall of Roots. In the farthest accessible reaches beneath Vams, there's a narrow gallery known as Le Pli, or the Fold. The floor tilts gradually for more than 20 meters before reaching a sudden halt, a wedge-shaped chamber, blank and unmarked, with a ceiling covered in what appear to be fossilized root systems. Botanists consulted on the roots claim they do not match any known flora native to France, modern or ancient. Their shape resembles subterranean tubers, but with a branching pattern more akin to neural dendrites than plant life. One geologist speculated they may be mineral growths mimicking biology, but the complexity of their pattern, interwoven but non-repeating, defies such an explanation. The air in the hall is described as thick, not stale, as if charged. Voice echoes die quickly. Timekeeping devices slow or stop. Explorers report a strange visual distortion at the terminus of the hall. Movement appears bent, as if through a lens of variable thickness. No one has spent more than 30 minutes inside. The steps that descend into noise. In a tunnel beneath Rue de la Convention, a stairway was discovered in 2018, 16 steps, half-worn, descending at a shallow angle into a featureless pit. The steps are carved with a rough, rhythmic chisel technique not seen in Parisian quarries, and most tellingly, they descend into solid rock. The pit has no base. Explorers who've dropped small objects down report no sound of impact. Microphones lowered in have picked up low resonant frequencies with irregular pulses. Some liken it to a massive heartbeat, others to mechanical droning. No mapping equipment has survived longer than 5 minutes in the pit. This site is now cordoned off by steel bars welded into place. Still, markers appear nearby, symbols made from charcoal and bone fragments, aligned to points of the compass. No one claims to have placed them. Some believe this is not a staircase, but a receiver, something meant to focus sound or draw in vibration from the layers below the Parisian substratum. The uneven chamber. One structure, discovered in fragments across multiple undocumented zones, has been referred to collectively as La Chambre Inégale, the uneven room. What makes it unique is that it seems to exist in separate sections across the network, yet each section mirrors elements of the others. A carved corner here, a slope there, a ceiling detail repeated with perfect precision miles away. When drawings are overlaid, the rooms complete each other, as if parts of a single space fractured across geography. There are no corridors connecting these pieces. Their replication is exact down to the millimeter. Some cataphiles suggest this is not a mistake of memory or coincidence, but a distributed structure, constructed non-linearly, impossibly, perhaps not built at all, but revealed through excavation when certain conditions of pressure and silence align. No one claims to have seen all sections. Each known portion bears a faint spiral etched into the ceiling, always off-center, never directly above. A recent theory posits that the structure only reveals its full shape in dream, pieced together by those who visited its scattered nodes. A whisper network of explorers now trades drawings made from dreams, composite sketches of the space they believe might be forming beneath Paris, one impossible wall at a time. Vanishing entrances. By 2021, a phenomenon became increasingly documented among experienced cataphiles: permanent entry point sealing without intervention. These weren't collapses or police closures. No rubble, no barricades, no new welds or city-placed signs, just absence. One of the most well-known entry shafts, located behind a boarded door in an abandoned maintenance hall off Boulevard Arago, was used for decades. On a routine descent attempt in March of that year, it was gone. Not bricked. Not blocked. The wall where it once existed was solid, aged to match the surrounding structure. A thin scratch of faded chalk near the site read, "Certain Sewell savant quant ellis ointiate franquis." Some thresholds know when they've been crossed. Other entries followed, manholes that led to central arteries beneath Rue de Tolbiac, a utility shaft near Montparnasse Cemetery, a centuries-old wine cave access under Place d'Italie. Gone, not altered, but erased. Veteran groups began mapping what they called zones d'oubli, forget zones. These are areas where tunnels no longer lead where they used to. Markers vanish. Walls realign. Time becomes difficult to track. A descent route followed for years might suddenly reconfigure, leading back to its start or splitting into unfamiliar branches. When these occur, no collapse is registered on seismic instruments. No sounds are heard. Nothing is recorded on camera. The only sign left behind is the shift, a sense that the tunnel has quietly decided not to allow return. The unrecorded walkers. Between 2019 and 2022, more than a dozen seasoned explorers ceased surface activity altogether, not due to disappearance, but by willful removal. These individuals, known by aliases only Tige, Meyer, Orus, Delta, Chamber Zero, no longer posted on private forums, updated maps, or attended surface meetups. Yet their glyphs continued to appear. Fresh, unmistakable. The implication was clear. They were still moving, but no longer as part of any known group or surface world. Their paths took them beyond the communal layers of the catacombs, beyond history, navigation, or even message. They had crossed into what many refer to only as El Interior, not just physically deeper, but conceptually beyond the constructed catacombs. These individuals no longer carry lights. Some no longer carry packs. They move through tunnels that aren't listed, galleries no one else finds again. One was observed from a distance through a broken shaft camera near Gallery R6. The footage showed a figure pausing, facing the lens directly, eyes closed. They lifted a hand to the stone and tapped it 3 times in a pattern not linked to any known cataphile code. Then they vanished behind a curve. When the shaft was investigated 3 days later, it no longer connected to the gallery. The passage behind had sealed completely, yet bore no rubble. The wall that moves. The catacombs, for all their myth and silence, have walls, and walls by nature stay. Except when they don't. Explorers in Zone Hematite, an older corridor beneath Parc Montsouris, began documenting a recurring anomaly. A featureless stone wall near water-slicked junction would, without warning, appear several meters further along the tunnel upon return, displacing previous path structures. Some believed it was simply misremembered. But after a group marked it with charcoal, not only did the wall relocate again, the mark moved with it, preserved in exact placement. Over a 3-month period, the wall shifted 6 times. Eventually, it stopped appearing altogether. The corridor behind it, always sealed when the wall was present, was found opened after the final shift. A hollow passage, seemingly untouched. In it were 3 unlit candles. Each one bore a different wax composition, with no sign of how they arrived. The area was logged by 2 cartographers. Their file ended with a sentence scrawled on the final page. "We did not go in. That was not an entrance. It was a rehearsal." The blind turn. In the quarry sector southeast of Rue de Vaugirard, there's a turning point known only as La Courbevugle, the blind curve. It's a bend that leads into a short, dead-end chamber, simple, flat, unadorned. But the turn itself has developed a reputation. Those who walk it report a brief cessation of self-awareness, a 1 to 3 second blackout. Not fainting, not disorientation, absence. Anecdotally, explorers describe the moment as a clean edit, like a film splice. You're walking, turning, and then already facing the next wall without recalling the steps in between. One group attempted to photograph the turn mid-step. Each image taken of the turn's interior was corrupted, showing vertical bands or color voids, despite flawless shots before and after. A whisper tag later appeared near the curve. Ne tourne pas si tu veux rester. Do not turn if you want to remain. It has since faded, but not been removed. The silence that responds. A lesser-known phenomenon occurs in the lowest, driest zones, those far from dripping water or airflow, places where the silence feels compressed. Here, explorers sometimes report what they call mirrored quiet. It begins with an awareness that the space is not simply silent, but waiting. Some who speak in these chambers say they hear not their own echo, but a slightly altered repetition, delayed, reframed, as if another presence parallels their voice by intention, not reflection. These are not audio illusions. In one documented case, a low-fidelity field recorder captured a whisper echoing a phrase that had not yet been spoken aloud. The voice matched none of the three explorers present. Its source was nowhere near the microphone's origin. The clip circulated briefly online before being pulled by request of one of the explorers, who later wrote, "It answered. I asked nothing, but it answered anyway." The breach at Passage Veuve. In early 2023, a long-ignored blockage near the disused Passage Veuve, a sealed corridor beneath the 14th arrondissement, was cleared by rainfall and erosion. Behind it lay a completely unrecorded segment of tunnel, dry and dustless, bearing none of the fungal or mineral decay common in abandoned catacomb zones. The passage was curved with gentle intent, as though shaped by thought rather than tool. No markings, no tags, no signs of occupation. At the far end, a stone disc embedded vertically into the wall, engraved with what appeared to be a spiral intersected by a line, a symbol not found in any known cataphile lexicon. Upon touching the disc, one explorer, Saphir, experienced what she later described as a tightening of breath, followed by a momentary absence of sound. Not just silence, but a void in which even her heartbeat was imperceptible. Her handprint remained visible on the stone for hours after withdrawal, despite the surface being solid and dry. 3 days later, the corridor sealed itself with a collapse from the opposite direction, not where the explorers had entered, but from a tunnel that had been stable for over 60 years. The breach is now known in field notes as l'entrée retenue, the withheld entry. Subharmonics behind the bone wall. In late 2022, during acoustic mapping of a corridor beneath Rue de Plants, audio researchers noticed subharmonic fluctuations, very low-frequency vibrations, emanating from behind what was thought to be a standard ossuary wall, a symmetrical stack of femurs and skulls installed in the late 18th century. These pulses occurred in 3-minute cycles, oscillating between 8 and 10 Hz. They were not natural tremors. No seismic activity was recorded elsewhere in the city. The rhythm was too regular, too deliberate. With city authorization, a test core was drilled through the wall. Behind the ossuary facade lay an empty chamber, perfectly circular, with no access from any known route. On the floor, a pile of broken limestone pieces arranged in a spiral. Each was marked with a shallow engraving, a line, always pointing inward. No sound was detected from within once the core was breached. But those present during the drilling reported nausea, unsteady gait, and in one case, a sudden overwhelming sensation of déjà vu accompanied by panic. The site was resealed within a week. It has since been removed from the IGC's public tunnel registry. The chamber that breathed. Reports began circulating in 2020 of a strange, narrow gallery near the former observatory entrance, a shaft seldom used due to dangerous flooding. A group of 3 cataphiles, descending during a rare dry week, discovered what they described as a chamber that exhaled. They entered a tunnel that seemed colder than others nearby, its walls smooth and strangely porous. The air pressure rose and fell every few minutes, not from airflow, but from mass displacement, as though the stone itself expanded and retracted, subtly rhythmically. The explorers described the sensation as standing inside a lung, not metaphorically, but with physiological effects. Ears popped. Hair rose. One explorer's pendant lifted off their chest, held aloft for several seconds by what they claimed was static or force, then dropped. Recordings taken in the space captured a low pulsing, not unlike breath through cloth, accompanied by a faint clicking sound at irregular intervals. When the explorers attempted to retrace their steps, the tunnel behind them was shorter than before. They exited in under 5 minutes what had taken 20 to enter. They returned twice more. On the third visit, the chamber was no longer accessible. The air beyond the first curve was heavy with ammoniac scent, and the floor trembled faintly, too faint to register on seismometers. The team marked the gallery with a black glyph, a circle inside a downward-pointing triangle, now used informally to mean active presence. Interruption events. Since 2018, cataphile field logs began noting a category of unexplained disruptions during underground excursions, brief, unplaceable moments when reality appeared to stutter or reverse in highly localized ways. Termed interruption events, These occurrences are distinct from disorientation or exhaustion. Most last only seconds. All are deeply unsettling. Documented types include visual doubling, seeing one's companion twice in the same frame of vision, once moving, once standing still. Echo inversion, hearing footsteps before they're taken. Light bleed, torches briefly illuminating walls that aren't there, revealing voids or structures not visible upon closer approach. Static freeze, feeling an entire corridor halt, as though put on pause, air, sound, and movement suspended, then snapping back into motion. One field report from 2021, logged by Lame, details an interruption event while crossing a well-known ossuary route. My hand passed through where a wall should be. It was like heat mirage, but hard at the same time. Behind it was wrong scale. The bones weren't human-sized. I pulled back. Everything resumed. No photographs exist of such events. Only testimony. The events are unpredictable. Some believe they occur near ancient boundary points, junctions where the constructed tunnels meet something older, something beneath even the quarry layer. The final fault line. In 2022, beneath Rue de la Glacière, the IGC recorded a tremor, a shallow, localized vibration with no seismic precursor. 3 separate instruments caught the pulse, not vertical or lateral displacement, but a contraction, as if the bedrock flexed inward. A week later, a previously sealed sector reopened. No records exist of its layout. No maps show chambers beyond the breach. The interior was hot, dry, and utterly silent. No echo returned. No draft. No detritus. Just a tunnel carved with a precision unfamiliar to Parisian methods. Too clean, too intentional. No team has since gone deeper than the first chamber. At its edge, the floor changes, no longer limestone, but some darker, denser substance that resists scratching, cracking, or sampling. Even diamond tools fail to mark it. The corridor curves out of sight. Beyond the bend, all instruments fail. Batteries drain, lights flicker, cameras shut off. A metal plaque, never logged before, was found nailed to the tunnel wall near the breach. Unmarked, except for a single phrase in etched brass. Ainsi stayed, c'est l'intention que vous précède. At this stage, it is intention that goes before you. The threshold that moves. By 2024, the boundary between the Paris catacombs and the city itself, between below and above, was no longer easily drawn. What had once been considered purely geographic, a stone network beneath human life, began to shift into symbolic terrain. The term catacomb no longer referred only to tunnels, ossuaries, or walls of bone. Among explorers, it came to signify a condition, a state of passage one entered not just by descending, but by proximity, by exposure, by thought. Entrances were reported in impossible places, the base of stairwells, between metro stations that never connected, mirrored utility closets, supply rooms with more corners than geometry allows. Some were physical. Most were felt, moments where the air narrowed, time leaned, and silence turned convex. One cataphile, Zara Nacht, spoke of the emergence of internal chambers. It's not the tunnels expanding. It's us. We're being restructured to receive them. Internalization. Explorers began to report experiences in which the catacombs seemed to pre-exist their descent, as if they had always been part of their cognition. They described dreams that predated their first visits, dream maps that turned out to mirror real chambers years later. One field note reads, "I walked a tunnel last night that I had drawn at 17. I thought it was a nightmare then, but it had the split bones. It had the loop. It had the second mouth." In rare instances, individuals began referring to galleries inside themselves, not metaphorically, but with topographic specificity. They spoke of inner walls, bone corridors, voids where language formed, and breathing spaces that widened when silence was respected. To some, the catacombs had inhabited them in return. The event horizon of memory. A phenomenon now known as the conscious return block developed among longtime explorers, the increasing inability to recall full routes after resurfacing. At first, it appeared as common forgetfulness, but eventually, it became structural. Paths once fully memorized became partial, scrambled, or reversible without exit. Some explorers could only remember the journey once they descended again, as though the map was held in stone, not mind. This cognitive shift wasn't deterioration. In some, it came with clarity, stillness, and a sense of being observed not externally, but intimately, as if something within the catacombs had begun storing what the brain no longer retained. One entry in Le Registre Souterrain reads, "I think the tunnels are keeping what I forget. I think they prefer it that way." Another simply, "It knows what I meant to say." The confluence. What began as isolated tunnels beneath Paris has, in the mind of many explorers, become a convergent field, not linear, but layered, looping, recursive. Theories emerged that the catacombs were not beneath Paris, but interlaced with its history, folding into each moment of the city's becoming. That time moves differently underground, not slower or faster, but indifferently, allowing moments to bleed into each other, across years, across lives. That the ossuary was not a conclusion, but an overture, the visible index of something far older and unfinished. Some whispered that the catacombs are not human-made at all, only revealed by human hands. That our attempts to map, name, and occupy them are misinterpretations of an emergent structure, one that responds to thought, to fear, to intention. The final room. In late 2024, an explorer known only as Eclat transmitted a final message via encrypted audio file to a private group. The file contained 7 minutes of silence, followed by a single sentence. It opened, not because I arrived, but because I was ready to stay. Attached was an image, a chamber with no walls, no floor, no ceiling, only bone dust suspended in space, held together in the shape of a spiral. No context, no coordinates, no light source. This was the last verified contact from Eclat. Their tag, a small inverted omega, has appeared at 3 separate sites since, all in places that should no longer be accessible. The catacombs are not merely beneath. They are the space between silence and memory. They are where the city forgets, and we begin again.